on his lapel, and then he started to talk about the Putin price hikes, and everything to blame is on the Putin price hikes. Um, we tend to, they tend to forget, or they tend to leave out, conveniently leave out the fact that they're the ones that decided to push sanctions on Russia and to put, crazy nuclear type of sanctions on Russia, which boomeranged right back and hit Europe and the collective West, the United States and Canada and all of
Yeah.
us. They make it seem like it was this magical Putin price hike thing that just came up out of nowhere. It wasn't their decision. They're the ones that decided to go full animal with regards to sanctions. And now they are paying the price, but they're trying to lie to the people and blame Russia.
That's exactly correct. Can I just say, I first listened to Biden's comments in Iowa, and then I read them just to make sure that what I'd listened to was in fact complete, and that I hadn't misunderstood, or rather not misunderstood, because it's very difficult comments to understand, whether it really was as unstructured, incoherent, and as rambling as it sounded. And on the page, when you actually read it was just all over the place. I mean, I've had some trouble with Biden's speeches. I remember reading some of the speeches he gave when he was, just before he became president, when he was acting as president-elect. And I already found them, dense and frankly almost unreadable and very strange and unclear. Well, there has been, and I really want to say this, a very, very significant deterioration. This was just so all over the place. I mean, he was talking about all kinds of things. He was talking about Delaware being an agricultural place, not an industrial place, as many people think, about corn being used as, to make ethanol and gasoline. He was talking about so many different things. And it barely made any kind of sense to me. The only point where it sort of came together was over the Putin price hike. Let's just say straight away that is complete, utter BS. It's one of the most extreme pieces of BS I have ever seen. Inflation started to take off in the United States a year ago because of the massive overspending by the administration after the pandemic, which we said was going to result in higher inflation, which other people like, Larry Summers said would result in higher inflation because it was not backed by goods and it did not take into account constraints on supply chains and industrial capacity within the United States. And inflation was already surging. And then Biden comes along, rather his administration comes along, and commits the United States to an economic war against Russia, the world's biggest commodity supplier. And of course, it results in inflation. It adds another tidal wave of inflation on top of the one that we already had. And it is starting to have a serious political effect. Now, Biden can talk about a Putin price hike. His acolytes in the media can talk about a Putin price hike. Paul Krugman can talk about a Putin price hike. But the reality is, everything that we are seeing goes directly back to the actions of Biden and his administration. And I'm going to say something else. My own clear impression, is that this Putin price hike thing is not actually gaining traction amongst the American people.
No one is buying it.
No one is buying it.
People are not buying it in the slightest.
No.
And the American people, from what I've seen, from what I understand, this is anecdotal, of course, but from what I understand, they know that this started during the period of the coup. They know that it was the leaders, the decision makers, who decided on lockdowns. Lockdowns didn't happen magically That was a human decision. Humans made that decision to lock cities down. And they also understand that this Putin price hike didn't happen because of magic. Humans, people, leaders decided to place these sanctions on Russia. And even more to the point, I think Americans understand that they decided to go nuclear with this sanction policy for a country that is not in NATO, is not in the European Union, and doesn't have any type of formal alliance with the United States. Not to mention, Americans also understand that there's a lot of shady stuff going on with Ukraine and Hunter and Biden, which is a whole nother layer and a whole nother level. So they're not buying it at all.
I agree. I completely agree. And by the way, the same is now happening in Europe. Now, in Britain, by the way, it's different. The approach that's been taken here in Britain is the opposite of what we see in the US, because we also have an inflation crisis now in Britain. Inflation in the US is now 8.5%. That's the official figure. The real figure is much higher. The inflation in Britain is now officially 7%. Everybody knows again that the real figure is much higher. What is happening is, because nobody in Britain is in any doubt about who took the initiative to trigger this economic war with the Russians. What is happening is that when the British media discuss the inflation crisis, or they don't like to call it the inflation crisis, they call it the cost of living crisis, which is a euphemism that they're trying to spin. When they talk about that, they avoid talking about Ukraine, Russia at all. It's something that has magically appeared out of nowhere. There's no somehow connection between the two. Because, of course, here what the worry is by the political class is that if the British electorate makes the connection, they start to say to themselves, well, the reason we're paying all these massive increases in prices is because of this war in Ukraine over a country which, as you rightly said, is not in NATO, is not in the European Union, or in any of those things. If they start to make that connection, they will start to say, look, enough of this war, we need to make peace, which is precisely what the political class in Britain, which is extremely belligerent, doesn't want. So they're prepared to keep the war going, to allow the inflation to get worse, and they're looking at the moment to throw a bone to the political bone to the wolves, the angry electorate. Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, is what some people are talking about. Some are now even talking about Boris Johnson. And we've had this whole Partygate affair revived because, of course, it's a one way of perhaps setting up Boris Johnson as the fall guy for the inflation. His bad economic decisions set off the inflation. We replace him with another hardliner like Liz Truss, God help us, or Ben Wallace, God help us also. But at least that way, we're able to blame the inflation on Boris Johnson rather than look to the real problem, which is the crisis in Ukraine.
Is Biden going to be the political bone that they throw in order to keep the war going in the U.S.?
I think exactly the same thing is going to happen. I think that is exactly what they're going to do ultimately in the US. At the moment, they're holding on to Biden because, well, nobody wants Kamala Harris. But I think if the midterms go very bad, and I think they will, well, you can already see Obama positioning, maneuvering. We saw him coming out. We saw him talking to Kamala. We saw Biden be kept in the background. I know some people think that, this is just Obama wanting to appear on the cocktail circuit. I don't agree. I think he's scheming and plotting, and I think lots of people are scheming and plotting. And I think they're going to say to themselves, if the midterms go very, very badly wrong, if we get charges against the son, which is increasingly looking likely, over Burisma and the laptop and all of that, well, the moment will have come to tell the father, Joe, you've done all you can, but, let's all agree that things aren't shaping out as they should. For the good of the party and for the good of the nation, the time has come to take early retirement and allow the new, dynamic, strong Kamala Harris to take over from you so that the war can continue, the military industrial complex can increase its profits, and our war of attrition against the Eurasians can continue unabated until, well, we achieve the victory that we still hope we will achieve, even though that's looking less likely by the day. And by the way, on the military side of things, they're providing $800 million of arms, or so they say. I looked at the list. I mean, I'd expected, after I heard all of that, that, we'd be looking at some massively impressive list of weapons that would be provided for all that money. And unless there's something squirreled away and hidden somewhere, which I don't believe, by the way, well, what it basically amounts to is more javelins and stingers, of which the United States is running out, and 18 howitzers, which, to be straightforward about it, isn't going to make any difference at all. All that shows to me is how expensive the war is and the extent to which the MIC is profiting from it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the MIC is going to profit big time from the deals they make, and the contracts that they sign with the government, and the R&D contracts is where the big money is. And of course, what that's going to do short term is it's going to pump the
Economy.
stock price. And, we all know about Nancy Pelosi's incredible ability to pick stock winners and make nice profits. So I imagine it's going to be a good couple of quarters for the political class.
Absolutely. I mean, on this occasion, we don't even need her, miraculous levels of insight to see which stocks are going to rise. So, I mean, that's absolutely coming. Apparently, look what's going to happen in Eastern Europe. The East Europeans have been pushed into sending all their arms to Ukraine. Apparently, many of them are now complaining that their arms stocks are now almost exhausted. So, of course, you've got to replace them. So you've got to buy them from the US. So, you've got to get into sort of deals with the US to buy these arms. Of course, the US taxpayer will fund this. They will provide loans. Of course, the Czechs and the Poles and the Bulgarians and the Slovaks and all of these people will have to sort of guarantee those loans and start to repay some. But nonetheless, in the immediate term, it means that you're going to have to replace all those MiG fighters from, the Cold War with, flashing UF-35s or perhaps F-16s in some cases. You're going to have to replace all those, ancient T-72s that you're trundling off to Ukraine, but they're all being destroyed with flashing Abrams tanks. This is going to be a bonanza like the MIC has never had for years. And on top of that, apparently US stocks of Javelin missiles and Stinger missiles are now severely depleted. So you've got to replace all of those. And you've got to catch up with the Russians and the Chinese in hypersonic missiles. So you're going to have to develop, vast new programs are going to have to be pulled out to, the hat to provide all the research and R&D to keep up with that. As you absolutely rightly say, we're going to see R&D spending explode. We're going to see the budget rise, the defense budget rise. And of course, that's going to translate into more long-term problems as the US industrial base, what's left of it, gets diverted towards more military production instead of production for civilian goods, which unbalance the economy even further. But in the meantime, all these geniuses like Nancy Pelosi are going to become even richer than they are already, even whilst everybody else becomes poorer because the cost of living crisis, as we call it in Britain, is going to just go on getting worse.
Right. The Putin price hikes. All right, we will leave it there, everybody. The Duran.locals, the Duran.locals.com. If you're watching this from Rumble, you'll see a red maroon button up top. Click on that button and you will get taken directly to our locals community, and that is Good Day Mug, and that is also the code that you use to get 10% off of all merchandise on the Duran shop. Good day. Take care.